Let me know if you want details on any event or need to make changes.
No, we're good. Can we send an email to Kauri from the podcast and tell her thank you for having me today?
I've sent your thank you email to Kaori, the organizer of the podcast. If you need to follow up or send anything else, just let me know.
Checked my Gmail and I got thank you email from you. Was it your first time to apply for YC?
No, it was not. We actually have applied a few times before and gotten rejected. And this time we were already affiliated with Berkeley Skydeck. Skydeck funded us, and April was just a hackathon idea. We did not even apply to YC. We won the hackathon and then we submitted our application.
Hi Neha, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. It was so great meeting you at the WAPI event last week.
Yes. So the reason why I could interview this wonderful CEO founder Neha is I was so amazed to see her demo, and I thought she's like coding to someone, but it was your product, April, right? Okay. Yeah, could you please just like a quick introduction about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Neha, the CEO of April. April is a voice AI executive assistant that handles your email and calendar hands-free. Before this, I was a Carnegie Mellon alum, and before that, I was working in India for Zoho. I led engineering for their accounting product and worked for the Middle Eastern market specifically.
What is April?
April is the assistant that my co-founder Akash and I needed because we would get a lot of emails every single day. And it was very hard for us to handle all of that when we were driving from SF to Berkeley for work. So we decided that we will build a small assistant that will take all of these emails, become like a personal executive assistant while we were driving to work. And then that's how April was born.
I see. Could you please show us some demo?
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
It's an iPhone app. And I'm just going to start speaking with her.
Good morning, Neha. How can I help you today?
Can you check all the events on my calendar for today?
You have 5 events on your calendar today. At 11:45 this morning, you have the Neha podcast at Channel Mission Bay in San Francisco with a Google Meet link available. At 3:30 this afternoon, there's a demo with Brian Johnson and April. At 5 o'clock, you have a meeting with Vinod Khosla. At 6, there's a team sync. You haven't responded to this one yet. And at 7, there's a team dinner with a Google Meet link, but you've already declined that invitation. Let me know if you want details on any event or need to make changes.
No, we're good. Can we send an email to Kauri from the podcast and tell her thank you for having me today?
I couldn't find a contact for Kaori in your address book. Could you tell me her email address, or would you like me to use the organizer's email from the podcast event?
Yeah, use the organizer's email from the podcast event.
I've sent your thank you email to Kaori, the organizer of the podcast. If you need to follow up or send anything else, just let me know.
No, thank you, April. That would be it.
Amazing. Okay. Wow, amazing. I checked my Gmail and I got thank you email from you. Amazing. Okay, let's deep dive into about April.
So my co-founder Akash and I, we used to have a lot of emails coming in, and it was very hard for us because we were driving 40 minutes from SF to Berkeley for work, and then we would go sit at the desk and spend 1 hour doing our emails again. And we just thought, like, what if AI could do this? Because right now voice AI has like very low latency. The MCPs are there, the LLMs are there. It only seemed natural for us to make the app that would make the perfect mobile experience. And that's how April was born. We built April at a hackathon for ourselves, and then we kind of won an interview to YC and got in.
The hackathon was this year or last year?
It was this year at the end of May.
Really? Okay, just like 3 months ago, you and Akash built this first MVP and then joined a YC after that.
That is absolutely right.
Was it your first time to apply for YC?
No, it was not. We actually have applied a few times before and gotten rejected. And this time we were already affiliated with Berkeley Skydeck. Skydeck funded us, and April was just a hackathon idea. We did not even apply to YC. We won the hackathon and then we submitted our application.
Okay, so when you and Akash were joined Berkeley Skydeck, at that time, you guys had a different product or idea.
Yes, we were building an AI agent evaluation system that could evaluate text and voice-based agents.
I see. Yeah. Wow, and kind of pivoted thanks to hackathon.
That is correct. That is correct.
Amazing. This is so like resilience. You know, as a founder or even human, we can have goal, but like in order to achieve goal, we can go to like plan A, plan B, plan C. I love your flexibility. So let's talk about your like ideal customer. What kind of people are your ideal customer?
So our ideal customers are a range of people. It's basically busy people like heads of engineering, heads of sales, directors and above in big tech. Also founders and investors who are very busy and get a lot of inbound email and have like a very busy schedule. So it's super useful for them. We also have people who are driving a lot to work. They could be engineers, senior engineers, marketing people, coordinating teams. They also find a lot of value in this product.
I see. So it means B2C or including B2B?
We're doing a prosumer approach right now. So reaching the end user directly. And then they're like these prosumer groups that really need time back.
I see. Do you have already paid customers?
We do have a bunch of paid customers already. We launched exactly 14 days ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing. So how did you find your first paid customer? Do you remember?
Yes, I absolutely remember. So after we did the hackathon, right? We had to interview for YC. So we were like, I don't know if this idea is going to like make money. It's just something Akash and I need. So what I did was like I built a website and then both of us hosted it on the internet and we posted some stuff on Reddit saying like, you can speak to an assistant and get to inbox 0. Do you think this is useful to you? If it is, like, will you pay $10 and actually show us that you want us to build this? And a few people paid $10 for a website with the promise of a product. So that's when we realized that people actually really, really need this. Why else would they put in their credit card details?
I see. Okay, you guys went to Reddit. And then, so there are many like thread or group, right? Did you find some specific conversation like a PM group or like a...
So we had a few subreddits where this really worked well. One was the subreddit for executive assistants. There was one for productivity. There was one for productivity apps. Some small business groups. Yeah, so we played around with a few groups, but these 4 were like super heavy inbound for us.
I see, thank you. First, you guys focused on Reddit. And then now you guys are checking other like social media's community.
That is absolutely right.
Amazing. Wow. So Reddit, and then did you listen their kind of like at the time still potential customers, right? Did you find their pain point or did you conduct some user interview? What do you think?
We did not do user interviews in the beginning. We just gave this idea like you can speak to your inbox and get it to inbox 0. That was such a strong pain point for so many people that they immediately resonated with it. Obviously, once we did that initial understanding that there's a market pull, we did speak to a lot of people with heavy inbound emails. We spoke to a lot of executive assistants to understand how they manage email and calendar and keep things really, really clean and manageable.
Thank you so much. And so last Saturday, we met at the VAPI's office. It was a kind of a pitch event, right? So as well, April, do you use VAPI's API or something?
We do not use VAPI's API at this point. We used them for our first MVP. That was great. Now we're using LiveKit, DeepCram, and 11 Labs.
I see. Thank you so much. It's so surprisingly smooth conversation. I couldn't believe it. Neha, definitely she must have phone call to someone.
Yeah, I'm glad you believe that AI is actually feeling human. That's a big compliment. Thank you.
Okay, so how did you meet your co-founder Akash?
Akash and I are friends from back home already. We've known each other for 5.5 years now. And then we came here and we reconnected building hackathons and stuff. So it's been great. We've been hacking things for almost 2 years now.
Really?
Yeah.
So let's talk about YC. So in 2 weeks, you guys do demo day, right?
Yes, we have our demo day coming up in 2 weeks on September 9th.
So in this cohort, like entire cohort is 2 months?
Yeah, the cohort lasts like exactly 9 weeks.
9 weeks. Actually, I come from a Y Combinator startup. It was 2021, and then I joined the company in 2023. So unfortunately, I am not founder, just a UX designer at the time. But so I'm curious. So how is the cohort? Every single day, do you go to YC office?
No, we do not go to the office every single day. We go there for our office hours with our group partner. We go there for any events that are for the group. We also have group office hours where like there are a bunch of companies discussing how things are going, setting goals, and then keeping each other accountable.
And there are any like mentorship or some workshops?
There is mentorship. Like we have a dedicated group partner. Our group partner is Gustav, and they give us like great feedback, great advice, and they anticipate problems before we run into them, and they help us like keep moving forward with April.
In these 2 months, did you have some aha moment? Wow, like this. What do you think?
There were a lot of aha moments. I wish I could tell a lot of them out here, but I think I won't be able to. But it's been great the way Gustav anticipates a lot of our problems, and he just tells us how we can address each of them.
For example, you and Akash has already experience at the other like Berkeley Skydeck, right? And you and Akash had already 5 years of experience and always building together. So what do you think before joining these accelerator and kind of almost all finishing like done? So your founder's mindset change?
There's definitely a change when you do accelerators. Even at Skydeck, when we're still a part of Skydeck, is you have goals, you have to keep building. The founder journey is a little lonely. It's nice to have other people who are building and following that kind of intense lifestyle. And it gives you community. YC is amazing as well. Like YC gives you very clear deadlines on what you have to achieve by when.
Deadline, I see.
It's more of a forcing function, so you keep growing. The deadlines are set by us. Like we commit that we will achieve so much within this period of time, and we are accountable, right? Because we've committed to it. And the whole cohort is like a bunch of really, really smart people. I think if we find the smartest people and put them in a room, they're probably in YC. And obviously the group partners have done so much previously, and their vision and their experience really shines through. It's extremely helpful to have that kind of guidance when you're starting to build a company.
So currently, you guys already have a paid customer and growing. So now, end of August. So what is your like best situation in end of this year? Or do you have any milestones?
We want to achieve aggressive growth. We have certain revenue targets in mind that we're like working aggressively to reach. We want April to become a part of all the busy people's lives. And now we're like Google and Calendar. We are expanding to other different tools as well.
Really?
To make it like, give it like the perfect executive assistant experience.
I see. Do you have some like plan? For example, in like November, we gonna launch new feature, or if you have.
We do have plans. You should stay tuned to our website and our LinkedIn. We'll keep posting our announcements there.
Please check the April and Neha's LinkedIn and also website. Okay, so last question. Do you have any pain point currently? For example, like it's difficult to fundraise, or it's difficult to hiring AI engineer or whatever, or sales, or
Oh, we are actually looking to hire a few people. We will be posting on LinkedIn soon. And we're looking to hire and expand the team a little bit. And we'd also love for everyone to try out our app, like your entire podcast audience. If they try it out and give us feedback, that would be amazing. April is already on the App Store, so generally available to everyone.
as a founder, of course you have a co-founder, but have you ever had a kind of like difficult feeling or burnout? Because of including my friends, many founders are like burnout or tired or couldn't fundraise, and they left from San Francisco actually. So have you ever had such a difficult time?
There have been days where it feels extremely hard, but then the mission is very strong. We want to get people 1 hour back every day. If I could gift you an hour every day, and I'm able to do that with April, I think that concept, that feeling that I get when I know that everybody's getting time back is enough to keep me going for now.
I see. Even before April, maybe you and Akash tried other ideas, but maybe you had to pivot, right? So I can imagine like as the other founders, same. So pivoting is kind of, oh, this is my baby, but we have to do bye-bye and doing new things. How did you convince yourself?
For our previous idea, we were, I think we stretched it on for a little bit too long. There was no pull from the market, and we should, ideally, when there is no pull from the market, it does not make sense to build something that people don't need. I think I'm very clear about that. Akash and I were very clear that there's no point in building something that nobody will use. And when we realized that's where we were heading to with our previous idea, and this hackathon idea worked, we wanted to go full steam ahead in this because there were people already asking for it. And then that actually helped us make the decision. Intelligence is knowing and when to call it quits for an idea.
So how about your personal things? How do you manage your like mental health or like even physical health? If you have some tips, for example, like doing some sports or hang out with friends, or how do you manage your like daily life to be a healthy, keep great motivation?
I think it's important to be in touch with family. For me personally, I'm very close to family. So I try to spend some time with them, even though they're like a little far away. They're in India. I try to get on calls every day. Amazing. Yeah, and then I go for walks. I used to go for runs. It's been a busy few weeks. I haven't. Also go to work out every now and then. I was very into yoga.
Me too.
Awesome. So that kind of keeps me going.
What kind of yoga do you do?
Hatha yoga.
Me too.
Nice. We should do a yoga class together sometime.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll obviously love for everybody who's watching this podcast to download April on the App Store and use her so you get time back, and that's what keeps us going. I would really love for them to try it and like give us any feedback that they have. Also, like if the second part of the question, like if you want to become a founder, there is no straight line. There will be ups and downs, and you just have to keep going. Find something that some people need and build it for them. That's a very good starting point.
Thank you so much for your wonderful conversation today. So I was so amazed and looking forward to see your next chapter. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
The 3 key takeaways from the conversation with Neha. 1. From Hackathon to YC in 3 months. April was born out of Hackathon idea to solve Neha and Akash's own problem. Managing overwhelming emails during long commutes. Within just 3 months, they pivoted from a different project, built April's first MVP, secured a spot in Y Combinator. This shows the power of fast iteration and following real market pull. 2. Finding customers before building the product. Neha and Akash validated demand early by creating a simple website and posting on Reddit. They asked people to pay $10 upfront for the promise of a voice AI assistant. The fact that users entered their credit card details provided the pain point was real. This scrappy validation gave them the confidence to go all in. 3. Founders' resilience and mission-driven growth. Despite early rejections from Y Combinator and pivots from other ideas, Neha emphasizes resilience and clarity. Intelligence is knowing when to call it quits. What keeps her going to April's mission? Giving people back 1 hour a day, paired with personal practice like yoga and staying close to family. Neha highlights the balance between founder grind and mental health. Okay, thank you so much for watching our episode today. We hope this conversation will help your future and career. If you like it, please subscribe and give you a like. Okay, thank you so much. Bye bye. またね。チャオ。